Hello, and let me welcome you to Hobson UMC on YouTube. I am VH Sonny Dixon Jr., the lead pastor here at Hobson. And once again, it is my pleasure to have you tune in and to listen to us. It is my pleasure to have my son Trey with me again as we continue to reach out in this time of great uncertainty, knowing that the numbers continue to rise and people are continuously practicing what they feel they need to do in order to stay safe in these times. So I am honored that you would take some of your time out to tune in and to listen. And it is my hope and my prayer that somehow in the conversation you might hear a word that might challenge you or give you comfort, whatever it is that you need. And I am just delighted that you have chosen to listen to us. As a way of centering us for this moment, I want to share with you a reading from Psalms 139. I'll be reading verses 1 through 12 and 23 and 24. Lord, you have examined me. You know me. You know when I sit down and when I stand up. Even from afar off, you comprehend my plans. You study my traveling and my resting. You're thoroughly familiar with all of my ways. There isn't a word on my tongue, Lord, that you don't already know completely. You surround me front and back. You put your hand on me. That kind of knowledge is too much for me. It is so high above me that I can't reach it. Where could I go to get away from your spirit? Where could I go to escape your presence? If I went up to heaven, you would be there. If I went down to the grave, you would be there too. If I could fly on the wings of the dawn, stopping to rest only on the far side of the ocean, even there your hand would guide me. Even there your strong hand would hold me tight. If I said the darkness would definitely hide me, the light will become night around me. Even the darkness isn't too dark for you. Nighttime will shine bright as the day because darkness is the same as light to you. Examine me, God. Look at my heart. Put me to the test. Know my anxious thoughts. Look to see if there is any idolatrous way in me. Then lead me on the eternal path. Always an important part of the worship experience at Hobson, and even on this time of sharing with you, is the sharing of those joys and concerns that we have as a community. As we come, we continue to ask for prayers for those who have recently lost loved ones, continue to lift them up. In this time, particular, when they were not able to have the kind of goodbye that they wanted to have with those loved ones. So we ask that you continue to pray for them and pray for some also who, in losing of loved ones, we know how important pets are to certain people. And we've had a couple of people associated with this congregation who have lost pets in the last few days. So we ask that you lift them up. I want you to be in prayer for Pam Hicks' cousin Charles Hicks, who is in West Virginia and had a massive heart attack, but he is recovering. But we ask that you just pray for that family and keep them in your prayers. I want to ask for you to be in prayer for people of whom are having to make difficult decisions in this time of where people are, we're still dealing with this coronavirus. People are being asked, in some cases, to come to work in environments that they know are not safe environments, and we have some people associated with this congregation who are trying to discern just what they need to do. Pray for those who are just trying to make decisions about how we function as a community, as the numbers continue to go back up, and we are putting in place mandatory orders for people wearing masks. So it's challenging, and so we just ask you to be in prayer. As we say, for our children in particular, as they listen to adults discuss about what is going to happen. We know it is creating a great deal of anxiety within them. And just praying for everybody who's having to deal with this heat. I told someone today this is sure helping preachers out, because it's hard as we're dealing with this heat. You don't want to misbehave and end up going to someplace else. So just be in prayer for all of the people who are having to cope with this this heat. And it reminds us that climate change and all of the things of which we want to deny are happening are indeed happening for us. Those are our special prayers that we just lift up this day, and just ask that you join us as a community in praying for them. Our gospel lesson for this Sunday, July the 19th, comes from Matthew's gospel, the 13th chapter. And we have another one of his parables that he tells in this chapter. This is often called the parable of the weeds. And I'll be reading verses 24 through 30. And then as Jesus explains it to his disciples, 36 through 43. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like someone who planted good seeds in his field. While people were sleeping, an enemy came and planted weeds among the wheat and went away. When the stalk sprouted and bore grain, then the weeds also appeared. The servants of the landowner came and said to him, "Master, didn't you plant good seeds in your field? Then how is it that it has weeds?" "An enemy has done this," he answered. The servant said to him, "Do you want us to go and gather them?" But the landowner said, "No, because if you gather the weeds, you'll pull up the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow side by side until the harvest. At harvest time, I'll say to the harvesters, 'First, gather the weeds and tie them together in bundles to be burned, but bring the wheat into the barn.'" Jesus left the crowds, went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." Jesus replied, "The one who plants the good seeds is the human one. The field is the world, and the good seeds are the followers of the kingdom, but the weeds are the followers of the evil one. The enemy who planted them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the present age. The harvesters are the angels. Just as people gather weeds and burn them in the fire, so it will be at the end of the present age. The human one will send angels, and they will gather all into the kingdom, all things that cause people to fall away and all people who sin. Then they will be thrown into a burning furnace. People there will be weeping and gnashing of their teeth. And then the righteous will shine like the sun in God's kingdom. Those are the ones who have ears. Let them hear. We give thanks for this word of God, and we pray that it takes root within our hearts so we can have the boldness and the courage to live it out. Amen. Well, Trey, how's your day been?
It's been pretty good.
Pretty good.
No complaints.
No complaints.
No.
As I was reading this word and this week, and listening to the news, my thoughts went back to Years ago, as people were talking about, we've got to get our children back in school. And, of course, we've got the president who is ordering them back, and the Secretary of Education is saying, kids need to be back in school. And I certainly understand and do, know that they miss being in school and miss being with friends, but most of all, being in places that they previously had felt safe. But with all of the rhetoric that's going on, I am sure that they have a great deal of anxiety about going back. And I found it interesting that a couple of days ago you asked me the question, how did you put it?
If Sonya and I were 10 and 14 in 2020, would we be going to school, or would we be homeschooled, or some other?
Yeah. And, that really, you got me to thinking. And as I said to you then, I don't think it would have been an individual decision just based upon you and Sonya. I think the other people of whom you were friends with and we were friends with, and people in the neighborhood, that we would have come together and tried to make a decision, because I think at a time like this and decisions like this should not be made in isolation. So even if we had made the decision to say, well, it's not quite safe for you to go back, then we would have had to make some kind of plan, and there would have been others that have been involved with that. And I think that that's one of the things that is missing in this whole process, is that the people who are making the decisions really are not in communication with the people who will be mostly impacted. I can't help but feel that there are some ulterior motives around wanting to send people back and where we will send them back. And I got to thinking about when the schools that you all attended and some of the decisions, even though there was not a pandemic, I mean, we had to make decisions about, going to school, when you went to school, if you wasn't feeling well, where would you go, what would we do? There were a lot of things that went in. And it just brought back to me that whole time of when we were having those conversations and when we were making decisions about the schools that you all were attending. We were dealing with the whole question about how do we make choices that would provide both you and Sonya the right, not only a good education, but the right environment that we felt that you all could be able to flourish in. And where you could grow and where you could have relationships that would grow. And so we didn't so much talk about good schools, because we know that when we began to label good schools and schools that are not so good, those really are catchphrases from either schools that have high concentration of poverty versus schools that don't have or have very little low-income kids that are in those schools. I mean, that's what we had. I mean, we started all that, initially, talking about black and white, what is good and what is white. But it's always our addiction that we have to always wanting to have a contrast between that which is good and that which is bad, and wanting to say, where is it that you all could be able to flourish and what would be able to be provided for you. all in those environments so that you all could grow up and to be healthy. And I remember having some conversations with friends about some of the choices that we made, about the places that we sent you to, and they were saying, "Well, no, you can't send them to that school because that's not a good school." And and I knew, and some of those people, were good friends of mine, and I knew what they was, what they were referring to is that these schools have good kids in them, and these schools have bad kids in them. And the power and the influence and the fact that, if you send them to the bad school, they're not going to have this, they're not going to have that, they're not going to be able to be successful. And I've got some friends even to this day that I refuse to have those kind of conversations with, around, what's good and what's bad. But while at the same time, I think I may have been, and your mother and I may have been a little naive, because we felt that wherever you all went, it was going to be a good environment, because we were going to work to try to make that environment a good environment for you all. But it still goes. And so when we're talking about, being able to send kids back and the people who want to send their kids back, most of those, even when you're talking about things about mass, those are and putting distance and being able to do the things, the places where the kids feel comfortable and parents feel comfortable, most often deal with those environments where they know the parents can provide for them the resources and put them in the schools. And the people who have the greater anxiety, one of the things that one of the major considerations are about kids riding on the bus and being in that close, confines on the bus. As we talk about, the airplanes, they're taking out people riding out the middle seats on the airplane. Well, many of these buses, are, designed to carry 60 kids, and some of them have 70 and 80 kids that are on that. And there's no way to be able to distance them. You have classrooms that were designed for 20 children in it, and many of them have in excess of 20, have 20, 25, children in there. And have tables. There's just no way for them to be able to have the distancing. And so I understand the whole anxiety around that. I want to move up just a little bit, and I'm going to tell you a story, one that we have never talked about, but it's talking about the interaction. And this happened, I guess you were around 14, I guess, 13 or 14. Around 14. A group of parents called and said that we wanted to have they wanted to meet and have a meeting because they had some concerns about who our sons were associating with. And to have this conversation, that's at that time we were over in East Nashville, the old building, and so they came over to Hobson, and we met. And the topic of the conversation was there was one particular kid that we felt, they felt, I was kind of caught off guard by it initially, but they felt that this young guy was having too much influence on you all, and we needed to make some decisions about what we were going to do about it. And, I guess, it ended up, and I guess because they were on my territory, so to speak, they were in the church. I said, well, there's only, I don't know how we're going to deal with it other than to have just hope that our kids make the right decisions. I said, because one, the only, if we knew who in our kids, our boys, who was the leader, then we could talk to the leader and we could have the leader convince the other ones they didn't need to associate with this kid. But I said, all of us want to believe our son is the influential one. But while we want to believe that, we don't want him to have the responsibility for influence the other. The second thing is, we can't tell them not to associate with this guy, because if we tell them, they're going to all talk. And when they all talk, then they're going to know that we have talked, and that's going to even drive them to him more. So the only thing I think we can do is to try to find ways just to fill up their lives, so that hopefully, they will make some other decisions about what was going on. And that would got to be part of the whole thing, when, because about that time you were beginning to venture out and wanting to go with some other friends. Up until that time, I could kind of control and say, nah, you got to ride with me. I'll be the dad who picks up everybody, because I knew where you were. But everybody was deeply concerned. And what was really, for me, ironic about the conversation in particular, as the years went back, all of us thought it was all of the other kids, but ours. And the reality of it is that as I look back, as I look at you all now, and as we in that group that when we met, I believe I don't know whether you all made good choices, but you ended up being good people, and you ended up being survived by and. For us, it was a whole thing about we think our kids are good kids, and we think this kid or these kids are bad kids, and we have to separate the good from the bad.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Because I don't know of any of my friends that I associate with on a personal level that I had worries about associating with them. Because, my circle is still little. And at that time, it was small, So I didn't associate with anybody like that I thought that was detrimental to my well-being. Like, oh man, I don't need to hang out with this person, because you can ask some of my friends during that time. I was always I don't know about that. I'll drive, I'll drive my car, or it was 13 or 14. No, I'm not doing that. I'll go home. So I won't say that I was the influential person, but I definitely was able to stand my own ground in that space. Like, I didn't really follow behind anybody's coattail in that way. Do you think it is wrong for the government to say, oh man, we need to go back to school, send your kids back to school? Do you think that they're wrong for promoting that? Or do you think that they're right along the lines of being okay with making that assessment that we should be back in school, kids should be back? Because, they've been out since March.
Yeah.
And here's some statistics that I kind of researched today, that of the black students in the Metro Davidson County area, 30% of those don't have internet, don't have a computer that they'll be able to use to do virtual learning. And there's 6% of the white kids in Davidson County don't have a computer, don't have internet. So already it's disproportionate when you're talking about black kids and white kids and being afforded the opportunity to stay at home.
Your first question, what I think about it, and I don't like the idea of saying they've got to go back because I don't think we will provide the resources necessary in order for them to go back. And I believe it's a cop-out to say we will give a child and make sure that a child has a laptop so that child can be able to learn, from home and to be able to do. I look at God. Yeah, I look at how they teach now, and there are many kids who are in school. When I used to go over to Lillard and Cumberland, there are many grandparents who are raising their elementary school kids, and that means they're in my age group, and I can't do math like they do math, now. In multiplication tables, I remember just going over with you all in the car. You just got to memorize it. You just got to do it. And so it's one thing to give me a computer. But if I don't have somebody there that's helping me, that's being supportive of me, but the other thing that is really bothering me is that when you look, our kids are at home, look at the violence that is taking place in our community. We're focusing on what's happening with the violence with the police and all of the other things. But our neighborhoods and people of whom are being displaced because their parents can't. We're going to have kids that don't know where they will be going to school because they don't know where they're going to be staying. And so to say we've got to go back, I want them back, but I want them back in environments where they have the resources. I also understand that if we don't hurry up and get them back and start to giving them some sense of emotional support, we will lose a whole generation of kids.
What do you think, if you were the president or you were the department head of education, what would you say we need to do? Because it's one thing to say, we don't need to do that, we don't need to do that. But what would you say that the best way to combat this new norm, what would it look like?
While we have been doing and looking for research on trying to figure out how to come up with a vaccine, I would be trying to make some kind of assessment as how much poverty costs us and how much a kid who lives in poverty and how much more do we have. While we're bailing out airlines and bailing out companies, I would be bailing out poor schools and schools that are having low performance. I would be trying to find ways to bring them back into buildings. We made a decision in this area to close Robert Lillard because we didn't want to do it, and the student enrollment was low, and so we could not run efficiently. I would probably open those buildings back up. I'd put those kids in. I know that means it's going to cost us more, but poverty costs us. I would have those kids being back in. The kids of whom can afford to stay at home. If they want to stay at home because they don't want to go to kids with what we call bad kids, then let them stay at home. But we've got to give resources to kids who are there. and who have no place else to be able to turn to. But see, also, if I were president, I wouldn't have our first responders and all of those people and the people who are essential workers. And many of the essential workers that are going and have to go in are people of color who can't afford to stay out. They would have first priority, and their children would have first priority of making sure they had the resources. So if we're spending $10,000 a student in Nashville, and that means we have to spend on poor kids $18,000-$19,000 to be able to have that happen, then that's would be the people who I would be bailing out. I would look at how we bail out our kids.
Okay. Now, based on that, how do we make that happen?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm going to use this question to tie it up to the message and all that we have. We've got to, first of all, I think, convey a message that we want all of our children back in school. We want all of our children back in school. And that we know what quality education looks like, and we're going to provide that, even if it ends up meaning that some of our kids will not be able to grasp it and to hold on to it. And we got to be honest with our assessment of kids. We got to stop this whole notion of social promotion and passing kids on simply because, and we only do that for kids that we think are not going to make it anyway. Just like we keep talking about, we need to be testing for where and whether or not you have the virus or not. We need to test every child and find out where that child is academically and put that child in that grade. And if that means we got some 9-year-old kids who are in the first grade, and that's where we have to start, and we need to accelerate to be able to do, that's what we have to do. And we've got to start, particularly in communities of color, being honest with the fact that we have not been as supportive as we should have been of one another, and that we have a responsibility, and we've got to share in that responsibility with that. And see, that's where this story, for me, is so important, is because the people who work for the farmer, the guy who sowed the thing, when they saw the weeds, they wanted to get rid of the weeds. They wanted to pull the weeds out because they felt like the weeds were going to interfere with the wheat that was there. But what they did not, and what the owner understood, is that you can't see beneath. You can't see how they are all connected. And when you start pulling out, and when you start making the assessment of what's good and what's bad, because the reality is they both looked very much alike. And when you start wanting to be the judge, that when I look at a child and I say, okay, that child's zip code is 37208, that kid's not going to make it, so I'm not going to invest in that kid. It doesn't matter what we do. We can go ahead and give that kid a graduation diploma right now, because that kid will not be, he or she will not be any smarter today than they will be 8-10 years from now. So go ahead, give them a diploma, get them out of the system so we can quit wasting money. We've got to look at them and treat them as though they are all wheat. Because we don't know. The rain falls on. Eventually they will weed themselves out. I mean, eventually the systems and structures will come, but what the story implies, and what I want to imply on the day, is that we never know about the sanctifying grace of God, that we look at folk that we view as people who might be weeds that can't make it, and we never know how they will end up turning out. And for the story, Jesus says, don't you worry about it. Ultimately, that's God's decision, not your decision. Your responsibility is to tend to them as if they were all precious, all worthy. I want to thank you for listening in to our conversation tonight. I'll be looking at this whole notion of what we talk about as being good and bad, and looking at the weeds in this day and time where we are living in such a divided world, and where we are where hate and division seem to be the order of the day. I think it's a timely conversation to talk about what we do and how we treat one another and how we look at one another. And we have to realize that, yes, there is good in the world and there is evil in the world. But I believe that as a community and as people of God, then we've got to do what we need to do in order to be the best of us and to believe in the sanctifying grace of God to be able to change people and to give them some opportunities. And we got to learn how to be able to deal with one another in these very trying and challenging times for all of us. Thank you for listening in. As always, I encourage you to be in contact with somebody. Just because we're staying at home does not mean that we cannot stay in contact. Trey brought to our attention, we have far many ways for us to be able to contact with one another. So continue to do that. Continue to be in contact with God. Continue to be in prayer for one another. If you need me, you can always give me a call, send me a text message, send me an email, and remember, we are back. We are worshiping. We are practicing, and we're being safe. And I do understand for some of you of whom have some anxiety about coming out. That's why we're still doing this, is while we don't do the message, we have the conversation, so you at least have some idea as to where we're going. And if you have any questions about where I went, give me a call. I would love to hear from you and discuss it with you later. So thank you for listening in. Pray that you will take care, be well, and stay safe. Amen.